Right. Hi again. So we're back with more literary positivism. This is for week 8, which is on alter bodies, enhancement, and things like that. But we will, in this particular session, focus on Becky Chambers, who is arguably a more challenging and interesting novelist because of the very minimalist kind of prose she puts together in the novels that she's done so far, and also a slightly different vision of the post-human that we have come to see. And I'll start with something which I think in many ways centers the novel's philosophical basis, if you want to think of it that way, as the question of purpose and meaninglessness. I don't know if you've seen in recent times, there have been more work in the public domain about slowness, about slow economics, taking things slow, and letting things happen, and the older idea that it's not meaningful if you work like that has been more or less now discredited. So in the novel in particular, the question of the human is actually the question of creatures having a purpose. And the whole idea that you can just exist in a world, be wonderstruck at it, and don't really have to do very much, I thought is interesting, because the general idea is that animals lack purpose and humans do. That therefore we have a more meaningful existence, shall we say, as compared to the animals. You just need to live. That's what animals do, as somebody says in the novel. So you can start off with that, Anna.
Yeah. So if you think of the human as having purpose and the robot as having no purpose, the animal as having just life and not maybe a purpose in that life, then the robot comes somewhere in between. And because in Becky Chambers' A Psalm for the Well-Built, the robot is at the center of that text. So he's the one who also demonstrates both purposefulness, as well as the lack of purpose, because he speaks about how robots do some stuff. So they might devote themselves to looking at stalagmites for 3 years, 5 years.
Yes.
They might be looking at some beetle or
watching the paint dry.
Yeah, so they do that, and that's purpose, except that we would not recognize it as purpose, because what does it gain anybody in doing that? As opposed to the human, and Dex is the example of the human who has purpose and who is sick of that purpose. And she tries 2 things, and she's sick of both of them. So is it our defining trait that we have to have a purpose and that we fulfill that purpose? And actually, it is something which should work for us to think about as well, because when we think of today's world, when we look at how children are taught that you have to be passionate about what you're doing and that you have to do it, really, what if I just want to look at stalagmite growing or stalactite? And what if I don't have a purpose?
Or if that is the purpose?
Becky Chambers is interesting because she is, in one sense, very much of our time. She is giving us the permission to be whatever we want to be. You don't necessarily have to fit in. She is using all the right pronouns. She's doing all of that. And yet she is also questioning each of those ones, even as she does it. So even this business about having purpose. And there is one point at which the robot, because they have this exchange, and I'll go back to what happened in the Winterson book as well, where Pink says, but you are a robot. And at one point, Spike will tell Pink, you are human, and I don't hold that against you. Over here as well, you have a line where Dex says, the robot says, Moscap says to Dex that we don't have to fall into the same category to be of equal value. That what does it mean to have value? And that, I think, is where I would like to begin with A Psalm for the Well-Built. That it's a meditation on the idea of what has value, or which of your actions can be seen as important, valuable, and therefore you are valuable and important.
And the refusal of abiding by purposefulness, does that take away your value? If I don't adhere to the
Your
directive
version of
principles
purpose.
of values, for instance, or purpose for that matter, because it's also agential at that point, isn't it? That I choose not to, and that's a very Bartleby situation. I choose not to have the same purpose as has been determined by, say, historical evolution, where humans have a goal-directed life, that this is what we need to do, and then this, and then this. And that linearity is itself being called into question. But yes, over to Sharad about this point that Anna has just made.
Yeah, I have one slight addition to that point, because if you're talking about purpose, and if we have traditionally defined the human as being governed by by the pursuit of certain kinds of purposes, important purposes or valuable purposes, let's say, not any random purpose, and then we contrast it with the robotic purposes, let's say, the study of stalagmites or the study of insects. We also need to take into consideration the fact that these robots were originally meant for a different purpose, and this is alluded to in the book, in the conversation between Dex and Moscap. So at one point, and this is rather amusing in the exchange, when Dex is not able to carry the water tank to the source of water,
Yes.
and Moscap volunteers to do it, and initially Rex they are quite PC about it, right? So they do not want the robot to do it, because that would be a kind of reinforcement of the older human machine or human robot equation that they have broken away from through the treaty or whatever. So, and then Moscap actually says that, what if I want to do this? Have you ever considered this? And that connects with your point about agentiality, actually. Because in choosing to perform a certain action, there's also the establishing of a certain code of affiliation perhaps, which is not to do with one being master and the other being governed, let's say, the human machine binary. That hierarchy itself is being revised in terms of how the original purpose of the robot no longer holds. And now there is a different end to this kind of interaction between the human and the robotic. So I thought that was also interesting, because it is redoing the purpose of the robot.
Yes, and it connects with something that we have seen before also in Ishiguro. I always return to Ishiguro's texts for this, because I think he probes this problem of agency more than anyone else that I'm aware of. Where, for example, if you have designed the robo to service human needs, then to disallow the robo from fulfilling that, would it not be a violation of their rights? So you have a double-edged premise. One, should you create robots whose job is to be servitors to the human? First question. Second, if you have created them with the algorithms geared to giving service to the humans, then to deny them that would be a violation, because that is against their capacity and agency to fulfill their job. Suppose it is my ardent desire to lift up this water tank or cook a meal, and now you're saying, no, robots should not do that. Isn't that a violation of robo rights? Because the robots were designed to be. So there are two parts to this point that both Anna and you have made. That one, you have moved beyond the initial intent or purpose assigned to a robo, and the robo has also moved beyond that. And at some awkward moments, such as this little incident, an older notion of purpose and agency and intention comes into play. Because it's like, what do robots want? Oh, we only want to serve you. That's what we are designed for. Oh, no, you can no longer serve us, because we have established equality between robots and humans. But that's not what we were built for. If you deny humans agency, and if Robo sapiens are Homo sapiens of a different kind, what people have referred to as para-humans or alter humans, if they do all the functions of a human, why should they be treated as any less? So the question of agency is paramount also, because the responsibility for carrying out your functions And Anna mentioned creatures who are things that are just pure mechanical bombs in Winterson. And we are reading the text together. What is their purpose? A repetitive set of actions, mindlessly done, which is a very Fordist model, as we know. And then the others who say, sorry, that's not our job. So the question remains as to this encounter between humans and robots in a situation where the debate revolves around rights, responsibilities, and agency, isn't it? So what do you have to say to that, Anna? Is that a post-human vision?
Yes, because when you look at agency within the text, you have two references made by Moscap about agency. One is to do with how the bodies of the robots are harvested. And he uses the word harvested. And I was like, suddenly all my bells were ringing. Ishiguro, Ishiguro, Ishiguro.
Ishiguro.
Their bodies were harvested by their peers who reworked their parts into new individuals, their children. It brings together 2 or 3 things, right? That robots can have children, that there is harvesting of their parts, and which are then reworked into new individuals. And there you have your post-human in one sense, because it's of course a robot, but it's also child, and it is a bringing together of various parts from various robots. So is it the individual or is it a community? And they have remnants of their memory. And I don't know whether you remember, we once read this book, Unwind, in which
Unwind, yes.
Body, I think it was Unwind, where body parts remember what the person whom they once belonged to. And it's the same notion which comes up over here, that there are memories, there are remnants of memory for
imprinted.
Yes, imprinted. He says, I don't know why, but I get nervous when I go into the factory, and that's Moscap. When he goes into the factory,
yes,
it's a remnant.
It's a
memory which is there somewhere. So in that sense also it connects to the Winterson book, where everything is imprinted with what it once was. So here also the robots' memories are also there like that. But yes, so it's post-human in this question of harvesting individuals, except that your agency question comes in here. When Watson Dex asked whether it's not a problem that when you're coming to the end of your shelf life, and the robot says, why, everything comes to an end. We also do. And we don't yet come to an end. I think there is one line, it says something about how it is how the world works that things end. And in that sense, I thought it was very interesting, because what we think of as human frailty, and which the Winterson story tries to work around by saying that people can live forever by getting themselves genetically fixed, etc., etc. Here, wanting to end is also seen as part of the human, and it's seen as a necessary part to what defines you as human, that everything ends, and the robot also will end, but will also go on. In that sense, it is both human as well as, I thought, post-human.
Yeah, that's a little more complicated than what we thought it was at first reading, as I recall it, because at some point there's also this passage which I managed to recall and put down. Everything else breaks down and is made into other things.
Yes.
You are made of molecules that originated in an immeasurable amount of organisms. You eat dozens of dead things every single day to maintain your form. And when you die, bits of you will be taken in turn by bacteria and beetles and worms, and so it goes. We robots are not natural beings. We know this, but we are still subjects to the parent God's laws, just like everything else. So there is the cyclical nature of that, and this is increasingly a post-human theme that you see in even Richard Powers' The Over story, that the dead support a lot of life. And there's this passage in the Over story where the dead tree is lying on the ground, and there's an inventory of the life forms that a dead tree supports, starting with the fungal, the bacterial, and other microbial forms. So yes, Sharad, over to you about this particular idea about the repetition, the cycle, and things that die and don't quite die.
So if you're thinking about, let's say, sentience or consciousness as one of the characteristics that we consider as being exclusively human, and then we are talking about memory and how memory seems to be dispersed or distributed, recyclable, or can be amalgamated also, derived from other sources and then carried forward as well. We have a different model of understanding consciousness. And at one point, actually, Moscap says this is very resource heavy, the whole business of being conscious. I thought that was really amusing. Also, because it is talking about different kinds of intelligence there. So it's not just about one particular form of sentience that we're looking at. We're also looking at primal, instinctive, or instinctual reactions, which is something that Moscap actually uses to explain Dex's discomfort with drinking water that the surface of which is covered with algae, and cause that
Animal, being like an animal.
The remnant of it. So there is the idea of imprint, things that you're not necessarily consciously factoring in making choices, but there is, for want of a better phrase, perhaps your survival instinct that you inherit biologically. But there's also the question of agency, which is not necessarily to do with instinct, but with choice, about how even within the robotic community, and I'm using the word within quotation marks over here, there are different kinds. So it is not a homogeneous Fordist model of creation or creature, let's say, where you have different robots actually exercising their choice in what they want to pursue as purpose. So we see that there is, in some senses, the numbers and logic that govern the robot, which admittedly is what is the founding principle of it. But actually, Moscap makes it very clear that that is not how the robot perceives. So there's a distinction made at one point of time by Moscap between how it is made, which is numbers and logic, and how it perceives, which is more than the sum total of its parts.
Yeah, and that has also to do with a certain amount of consciousness which was not governable by preliminary numbers and logical codes. That, over a period of time, modes of perception change. So the parent God's laws, I think that's what it's called, the parent God's laws. It's a bit like the Isaac Asimov, the 3 laws of robotics, what the robot can and must not do. But it's also to do with the fact that over a period of time, the perception of what those restrictions, those laws are, have changed. So it's like, okay, so that's what you think they are, and but perhaps not. I want to move slightly onto a slightly different trajectory. First, of course, tea monk. Oh, sorry, Anna, you already hand up.
No, I didn't.
No? Okay. A tea monk. What's with the tea and what's with the monk? Why tea at all? It's interesting because tea has a particularly checkered imperial history. One, the idea of the monk is itself a little bit of a problematic category in many cultures. But I'm using those to move towards something else, and that is the question of nature in the text. And there are passages which describe what is the natural world which existed before you and which will continue after you. And there's at one point, and this is something I'm speaking from memory, that wilderness is the natural order of things and it will outlast you. I thought the conjunction of smart robots, the human, and the jungle was interesting. In a supposedly post-human tale, and it brought back memories of Octavia Butler, where things start all over again. You work with minimal technology, the earth has been devastated, and what you thought of was evolution has brought this upon us, and as a consequence, we are reduced to the basics. And wilderness is the natural order of things. And there is at one point the reference to that nature is not something that only happens in carefully curated enclaves between towns, something that pops up in empty spaces if you ignore them for a while. Even if you spend your whole life believing yourself to be deeply in touch with the ebb and flow, the cycle, the ecosystem as it actually is, you still have trouble picturing an untouched world. I thought that was an interesting one because it brought back the point we made in the Winterson discussion, and that's about wilderness and nature and culture. Anything to say about that, Anna?
Yeah. So when you read the book and initial chapters where she is still in civilization, so to speak, and she lives in a city, one of those big cities, right? But it's also a city which is in touch with nature because it's built of materials which are natural. It will revert to nature if left long enough. And there are several features which we are told about within that city which are natural. Right. And then you have the wilderness where nobody goes. The humans don't venture into the wilderness. Occasionally somebody goes, they're never heard from again.
Okay.
And it's part of the treaty that the robos live in the wilderness. And that itself is also, of course, in some ways paradoxical because
Yes.
the robots who are mechanical are living in the wilderness.
Industry manufactured things.
Yes. And that they were made for the industry. And then they finally, one day, they all got sentient and they put down their tools and they said, we are out of here. And they left.
That was really funny.
That is really strange. But it's also interesting because in the text, it says that that was the one thing which finally made the humans understand that something had to change, that it could not go on the way it was going on. So, and that, it's of course because I still remember the person who recommended this said to us that it is a utopian picture of a new world. So it is very utopic to believe that because the robots said that we won't work anymore and they pushed off, everything changed and humans got their act together and they got it right. But when you think about the wilderness and the robots that inhabit that wilderness, they are comfortable there, they are larger than life, they're mechanical, they cannot be hurt. Whereas when the human Dex ventures into the wilderness, she is not hurt badly, but the mosquitoes' blood sucks get her. And then, of course, there is the point at which the road collapses and there's no road left for her to go forward. At that point, she struggles in the wilderness, whereas the robot is very comfortable out there in the wilderness. It's his natural habitat. So what Becky Chambers seems to do also is to invert these ideas or to collapse the ideas, not even invert, to collapse the idea of what is natural, what is technological, what can be deemed to be human. All of those come together so that there is a world which is available and in which there are remnants of old human culture. So you have the hermitage as well as the factory which they go to visit. And yet it is also a world wherein the robo is comfortable looking at insects, bird calls. There's one which has made a pursuit of bird calls, isn't it?
Bird calls.
Yeah. So I think it's a nice, neat little inversion which takes place over there because the robots are more in touch with nature than the humans are within the text.
And that it points to again the point. Have we lost our ability to do so? So we have set up massive cities, large industrial barracks. We have manufactured robots who, for some reason, take to nature like fish to water, except that they're mechanical fish taking to natural water. And the humans who supposedly originated, which is why I thought the idea of wilderness and the post-natural, because people have argued that the post-natural is the way things are now, because whatever is natural is at least partly mediated already. And the robo, which quote unquote fits the natural world, reorganizes what we understand as nature. Over to you, Sharad, on this particular thing.
Yeah, so I was thinking if on the one hand, there is a very clear topographical distinction in this world between the one continent which is split into half, one half which is occupied by the humans, the city with the capital C and other suburbs, and then very clearly, and Dex makes a transition, right? Crosses across, and where the wilderness is. On the other hand, we also see, and I'm going back to Anna's point about how the city itself is now constructed architecturally differently from what it was during the factory age with the capital F and A. And there's this particular description about how decay is actually a built-in function of the city stars, the city that exists now. Crafted from translucent sisal and mycelium masonry and so on and so forth. The walls would in time begin to decompose, at which point they would either be repaired by materials, so on and so forth, or reabsorbed into the landscape. So the point I'm trying to make is that we do not necessarily see the wilderness itself as being recyclable, or there are things, take a natural or decompose on their own. The city architecture itself also has included the wild or the
Yes.
organically decomposable into its own ambit. So I thought that was also interesting. So if we have the wilderness as a landscape, then the cityscape has also changed in certain way.
It's like what we talk about as, or we call green architecture in that sense. But I thought the point about decay was very interesting because it also, again, we seem to be reading them together all over again. The robo that dismantles itself is not quite decay, because we associate the term decay with a natural process, with a, for want of a better term, a biological collapse of things. We don't expect to call the breakdown of machinery as decay. But when the machinery is overgrown with weeds, like in the case of the Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, then you think of it as decay, because there is rust, but there's also plant life on it. But I thought what was also interesting in the novel's attempt to speak in terms of what is built and what is not built. Because after all, it is the story of something being built. And there is a reference to humans as constructs also at some point in the novel. What is the idea about speaking in terms of something which has been built in the wild or contrasted with built in, say, the city? Anna? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah. So the title itself is a psalm for the
Wild built.
wild built. And who or what is the wild built over here? That is it that the robos are wild built, that the wilderness is, or is it that the humans have? And this is where, again, the primacy of the human comes into play, that the humans let the robots walk away. They could have stopped it. It could have it could have gone otherwise. So in some ways, it's a very idealistic representation of the human itself. That when the robots put down their tools and said, "Done," they let it happen.
Workers' rights have been respected.
Yes. Secondly, that when they drew that line, the wilderness, and they will not go into the wilderness, that line was maintained. I mean, it is utopian, thank you, but it's also unbelievable at some points in the text. But it makes for interesting reading because it complicates these questions as to how there is the possibility that the human might learn to let go, might learn to build, wild build in the city, as well as let the robots wild build. And they are wild built, right? Because they are all people who have been put together. They've been built with in the wilderness with each other's parts, body parts. So the psalm for the wild built, when we are thinking about it, is also a praise song for things that have grown, that have been built in the wild and are themselves wild built.
I'm going to use this to frame the final query comments for Sharath to wind up, because it's the section on alter bodies and enhancements. Is any of this enhancements either of the robo who is wild built, as Anna just pointed out, or is it the human who has enhanced humanity, that has enhanced itself by letting things happen? And the word letting is itself a problematic one because it appears to be according permission for something. So what is enhancement here? What is the post-human enhancement here? So final remarks to you, from you, Sharath.
It's interesting that you should use the word permission, because at one point during that exchange, and that episode I referred to earlier about the water tank, carrying the water tank, finally Dex actually says that, okay, you do whatever you like. And Moscap says, I don't need your permission. And immediately Dex, being Dex, takes a step back. Oh, I'm so sorry, being very apologetic. And says, no, I was just teasing you. I was messing with you. I was making a joke. So if we think about it, and we can connect the ability to, let's say, crack a joke, to use sentience and consciousness in a way to interact with, communicate with an other, the other being, in this case, it is the robot who's observing the human and how the human behaves. So he's the, Dex is the subject of inquiry in a certain way. I thought it was also interesting because it flips the equation, right? So you're looking at what the human is from the robot's perspective. And if we think about how it is humanity itself, or the ability to respond to the other, and also in a responsible fashion, If that is what we are thinking about as one of the characteristics of the post-human condition, let's say, of being able to incorporate and communicate with the other, then perhaps it is not to do so much with bodily enhancements, because they do talk about this, that that Moscap does not need to eat or sit, cannot in fact eat, because if Moscap eats, it's going to ruin the system, the wiring inside. So is it that defines the terms of exchange between the two, or is it the fact that Moscap can actually share a plate and then give the food on the plate back, so that the ritual is completed? So the ritual of commensality, if that is what makes us human, and not necessarily our capacity to ingest and digest food, then we look at a wider definition of human that's simply genetic, let's say, or biological. So I would think about it as the enhancement of the forms of communication rather than of bodies themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's why I thought this was a particularly interesting novel to set alongside Winter Suns, because both of them are rather unusual post-human tales in that sense. Well, we'll stop this for now. 1 second. Thank you.